Appamada's programs and facilities are supported through your generosity. Your support really does make a huge difference. You'll find a link for contributions on the website at appamada.org/contribute. Thank you so much.
To do this, we may. I've got quite a bit to say, and there's an activity that I want to do that'll take about 20 minutes. So we may cut into the next meditation session with the time that we spend on this. I apologize for that, altering the schedule, but just a thought about that for right now. So I want to give a talk. It's about feelings as they are labeled in the book by Analio, the Meditator's Guide for the Satipatthana Sutta. Yesterday, Kim led us in exploring how we can focus on aspects of our anatomy and the elements, or the ancient way of describing the elements, as ways to explore the establishment or foundation of mindfulness. And we heard Bhikkhu Analio lead those wonderful guided meditations. We'll be doing more of the same today, exploring some other areas the Buddha pointed to in the Satipatthana Sutta: feelings and mind. This morning, I'm going to talk about feelings, and this afternoon, mind and mental formations also. I don't know if the discovery of the Vedanas, which is the Pali word for feelings, or that gets translated for us as feelings, if the discovery of the Vedanas as such important kind of agents in human psychology, if that was something that the Buddha came up with himself, or if it was something from the previous explorations in the tradition that he came out of, much the same way that sitting meditation, breath focus, walking meditation came out of the traditions that preceded the Buddha. But as far as I can tell, I feel confident in saying that the Buddha was unique in making the Vedanas a crucial part of the meditation practice. A focus that teachers have elaborated on, reiterated for centuries, from the Chan masters to Dogen to the modern time, and our teachers Peg and Flint. We all think we know what feelings are, right? I mean, we have a modern definition. The word feelings is synonymous with emotions: love, affection, friendship, anger, hatred, anxiety. But the Pali word that the Buddha used is subtler, and it points to an activity of the mind, or really of the body-mind intimately connected, an activity that underlies and precedes our emotions in the same way that flipping a light switch precedes illuminating a light bulb. So to me, feelings has never been a very good translation, but I don't know what else to call it. Just to remember that we're talking about something different. So the Vedanas are not feelings, but feeling tones. Pleasing, unpleasant, pleasing or pleasant, unpleasing, unpleasant, neutral. The Buddha says, if we don't watch out for them, the Vedanas don't just influence, but govern, the way we perceive the world. And it's really important to watch out for them and to appreciate what's going on in our minds and bodies. In my time as a Buddhist practitioner, I've always been fascinated by the Vedanas because they were among the first aspects of Buddhist psychology that I was able to apprehend as true within my direct experience. A lot of Zen teachings are kind of abstract. You may have noticed this. Certainly a lot of the Buddhist teachings are very abstract. Even within the teachings about about Satipatthana. But the Vedanas are, in my experience, in here, in everything that I perceive. They're part of my body and mind as a thinking social animal. And the animal part is important, that they arise out of our evolutionary background, our approach to the world that has to do with survival. They're not so much like windows or eyeglasses that one looks through as the operation of the optic nerve. And I hope I can explicate that a little better soon. Let me ask a favor, Daniel. Take the little handbell and ring it as sweetly as you can.
This one?
No, the handbell.
I've never done this.
Okay, we hold it upside down, and you see above where your fingers are, there's actually a handle that comes out. So
pull
lift
it
that
out.
up.
Pull it out like this.
Yeah, up. Yeah. Very
Oh.
good. Ta-da! Okay, good. So I hope everybody can see what Daniel is doing, everybody online. So this is a little handbell that we use once a week for when the beginning of the last vows at the Sunday service. So it's a roll down with that bell, but I want you to just ring it one time. Just lightly tap the edge of the bell while you're holding it up straight.
You hold it like this?
Yeah, exactly. So my hearing of high pitches is not very good, but it's still resonating for me. I can still hear it resonating. So, okay, set that down. And then do the thing that you would do when Cam has knelt and then he lowers his hands to the mat. Give the big bell a sharp chunk. Okay, so not much resonance there. Maybe when you heard the little bell, you had a sense of enjoyment of that resonance and of the kind of sweetness of tone of it. And maybe when you heard the chunk, you thought, well, that's kind of unpleasantly sharp. Or maybe you had a pleasant reaction to that too. But the point I'm trying to make is that the reaction comes at least a split second before you have any words for it. And in fact, provides guidance for the words that you will put to the experience. That's like, oh, that chonk was a sound I've heard before. But before you get to the processing of that, you have decided whether it's pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. And I'll come back to the neutral because it's very important. So just again, I hope that was a useful illustration of how feeling tones kind of wrap around and shape our perception of things that we think are bare perceptions. They're not. We've already got the Vedanas in the way. It seems to me that there is a different sense that our mind-body apparatus is constantly scanning. So that's an external event. But if you just sit still, you find that your body and mind are constantly scanning for things to have reactions to. And again, this is part of our evolutionary background and survival strategies for human beings. That is, under the level of cognition in our minds, this aspect of our physiology and psychology, they are constantly scanning for things to pay attention to. Do you ever feel restless in meditation? That's what that's coming from, I think. That's my perception. I think that's where the restlessness comes from. This ceaseless nervous activity and energy that we don't ask for, and we have to work hard to notice it, much less to try and bring it under any kind of control, if that's even possible. It's my guess that pleasant and neutral feelings are only preludes to what our brains really want, which is unpleasant experiences. Neutral feelings. Our brains want information from the outside of the world to be significant, to be noticeable, to be signal, not noise. That's what our brains are hungering for that. And if we have only neutral experiences going on, as happens with most of our body most of the time, if we're looking into the feelings in our body, we experience that as a kind of lack of activity, a lack of action, and what do we call that? We call it boredom. And what is boredom? It's a special category of pain. We have to get rid of boredom. It feels so bad. There's a famous thing not so long ago. They did an experiment at the University of North Carolina where they had a group of dozens of students come in, and they had a choice of giving themselves an electric shock or sitting quietly for 15 minutes. And more than half of the participants, and almost all the men participating, chose after a few minutes to just start shocking themselves. So that's a measure of, boredom, of what kind of pain it takes. So we experience boredom as a special category of pain, and pleasurable experience or pleasing experience. The problem with them is they don't last, and then that turns to its own kind of pain. And the Buddha talks about this a lot. The Roman poet Ovid writes about the poignancy of the human condition, giving the example that even the most passionate moments of lovemaking, the lover is always wanting more, something different, something more. And there's this wonderful poem by Basho that may have been read on Friday, translated by Jane Hirschfield. In Kyoto, hearing the cuckoo, I long for Kyoto. Sorry, that poem gets me. So I want to give a personal example of just kind of the transition from quietness and neutral feelings into unpleasant ones. I'm sitting, I'm watching my breath, as it were, behind my back, somewhere outside of my knowledge. My perceptual apparatus is constantly scanning, using my nerves and my senses of proprioception and interoperception to check on parts of my body. Since most of these parts are operating at a baseline level of kind of blah okayness, that okayness doesn't register. It's just noise. It doesn't register because I'm predisposed to notice things that are either pleasing or unpleasing, and mostly the unpleasing ones. Then here I am, I'm sitting, and I notice that I have a sensation in the back of my left calf. And before I can name that feeling, it comes to me framed as unpleasant before I have time to register it through the thought processing parts of my mind, or before I start to make sense of it, as it were. Do our systems, the physical and mental systems, push us to make sense of pleasant things? Not so much. Of neutral sensations that were neutral within us, again, not so much. Partially because they pass away quickly, they have shorter half-lives, as it were. But unpleasant things call for exploration, for proliferation of potential background reasons for why they are occurring, and for a range of solutions to evaluate and to choose among for action. And then a building intensity, a building push to take action, to make things better, and to stop whatever it is that we're not liking. So when I notice my knee, the process shifts in a split second to a series of evaluations and decisions. If I were meditating, or if I were not meditating, I would simply scratch, or whatever, respond to whatever it is, shift my toe because it feels slightly weird in my sock, or whatever, whatever that is. But I have decided, I've given the feeling a name. It's an itch, and then I proliferate on that. Because I've named it, I'm compelled to ask questions. Is the itch moving or static? Is it getting worse or is it going away? Is it changing in any other way? And then I get into fantasy land. Is it an ant bite? I live in Albuquerque, where there are lots of black widow spiders, and I see them in my office, In fact, they're very shy and not aggressive and everything. But every time I get an itch, I thought, oh, is this going to be really bad? Could this be a black widow bite? And before I know it, it's just become intolerable. I have to act to deal with this. Except, sometimes I don't have to act. I can actually sit still and be a good meditator, And the thing is that this whole process, typically for me at least, is going on in a kind of background mode, and seldom arises to the level of cognition, and only through a concerted effort and the guidance that I've had from Peg and Flint, and having studied the Satipatthana Sutra before, I know to watch out for that. And again, this has been a very big, important part in my practice ever since, when learning about this, to say, to see that this is going on in the background. And well, I'll talk more about this, but that if we don't address it, as the Buddha says, it leads to proliferation of thoughts leads to habits, and habits can shape a whole life. There's a wonderful tone poem by the choral piece, tone poem by the composer Steve Reich, called A Thought. And there's only one line. It's how small a thought it takes to build a whole life. So, proliferation, all those kinds of things, getting snagged in the unconscious operation of Vedanas, unpleasant feelings, pleasant feelings, neutral feelings, and how they spin out, reminds me of a story that I heard, or a teaching that I heard from a teacher in Albuquerque. I've mentioned this before in a talk, that she said, if you're, when you're sitting, imagine you're sitting on the bank of a river, and it's beautiful and quiet, and you're in the shade, and the temperature's perfect, and all of that. And down the river come a series of boats, and some of the people, and there are people on all the boats, and some of them are having a wonderful time, and some of them are fighting, and some of them are replaying a scene from your childhood, and some of them are helping you decide what to do at work tomorrow, and that sort of thing. She says, watch them go by. Don't get on the boat. That's the main thing. That's what the Buddha is counseling with respect to the Vedanas, although he doesn't exactly say that in the sutra itself. But when we mistake a feeling tone for reality, apprehending something that's pleasant or unpleasant, we try, particularly for pleasant, we try to cling to it, and we get into the habit of indulging what the Buddha calls passions. If it's unpleasant, we try to end it with action or distraction, and that feeds our habit of aversion. And if we apprehend something as neutral, we try to substitute some other more pleasant feeling tone for it. Analio says there's more. If we take the Vedanas as accurate, that is the information that we're getting from this internal process, we lose contact with a huge dharma gate, which is the possibility of participating in moment-to-moment experience. And in my experience, it's only in rare moments that I can separate myself enough from this feeling tone activity that I can actually participate in moment-to-moment experience. Perhaps worst of all, the Buddha hints in the description of this, the Vedanas are the primary on-ramp for the process of our primal delusion, the most important and most powerful delusion that we live with, which is that we can construct and reinforce and inhabit a impregnable sense of ourself as a separate self. And I'll be talking more about that this afternoon. We're talking about the mind and mental states.
Can you please say that again?
I was just improvising on my written word, and I don't know. I'm going to say what's written here. Perhaps worst of all, the Buddha hints, the Vedanas are the primary on-ramp for the process of our primal delusion, constructing and reinforcing a sense of a separate self, which is the great, as Peg calls it, the great innocent mistake that turns our lives into suffering. And we'll say more about that later. So what does the Satipatthana Sutta say about Vedanas, and how, finally I'm getting around to what it actually says in the sutra, how to use them to establish mindfulness. Here is the instruction from the sutra. Would you read this italicized part and then hand it back to me?
And how does a monk remain focused on feelings in and of themselves? There is the case where a monk, when feeling a painful feeling, discerns, I am feeling a painful feeling. When feeling a pleasant feeling, he discerns, or she, I'm feeling a pleasant feeling. When feeling a neither painful nor pleasant feeling, he discerns, I am feeling a neither painful nor pleasant feeling.
Okay. So then the Buddha in the sutra goes through the whole checklist, painful, not painful, pleasant, not pleasant, neutral, not pleasant or unpleasant or neutral, or none of the above. And then he localizes them in particular descriptions. Feelings of the flesh, not of the flesh, internal or external, and so on and on. I'm going to skip over all of that and just read one more time, or to read some more. In this way, from what Nelda just read, again, just read the italicized part here. In this way,
the monk remains focused internally on feelings in and of themselves, or externally on feelings in and of themselves, or both internally and externally on feelings in and of themselves. Or he remains focused on the phenomenon of origination with regard to feelings, on the phenomenon of passing away with regard to feelings, or on the phenomenon of origination and passing away with regard to feelings. Or his mindfulness that there are feelings is maintained to the extent of knowledge and remembrance, and he remains independent, unsustained by, not clinging to, anything in the world. This is how a monk remains focused on feelings in and of themselves.
thank you. Okay, I'm coming toward the end. This has been long.
Joe, I'm
Yes.
sorry to interrupt again.
Yeah.
I understand internal feelings because you've
Right.
been talking about that and we understand it. What are external feelings?
This is not an easy question to answer. I mean, I have an answer for myself but I'd like to get more input on it. But I think it means feelings in regard to things outside the mind, so I'm looking at that candle flame, and it looks really nice to me. So I'm having a feeling with regard to an external thing. That's how I read it not as an externalized feeling, but a feeling in response to an external input, or what feels like an external input.
And in the end, there's no separation.
Yeah, exactly.
But walking in the charnel ground, you see a lot of things that you don't see looking into yourself.
Yeah, exactly. So, and again, notice that the Buddha, following that piece of advice from the Buddha on how to proceed, one can focus on the feelings, one way, the feeling itself, or can focus on the way that the feeling arises, how it arises, and the way the feeling passes away, or both of them. So again, this is like breath meditation. You can focus on the feeling of the breath coming in and out, or you can focus on the beginning phase of the breath, or the ending phase of the breath, or all of them together. Or you can simply recognize the process. I have a body. I have feelings. These things are arising over and over and over again. And to be able to see that it's important to do it smilingly. It was this recognition that pretty much almost stopped me from sitting, because it was this constant cascade of mental activity that I just found it overwhelming and almost physically painful to be able to be unable to stop noticing it. Anyway, so do that smilingly, as Analeo says, about the body and the elements. What does that sound like? To me, it sounds like thought labeling, a practice that, the term that I know from reading Joko Beck and that Peg and Flint has talked about a lot. We're just noting an experience as it arises and not becoming immersed in it, or to allow it to proliferate into thoughts, and we're not getting caught up in our reactions to words that we make up about it. We're seeing that there are chances for freedom at each of those connection points, and that we don't have to connect. Just the bare fact of the affective tone from moment to moment experience. We note it. That's what the Buddha is talking about. Bhikkhu Analeo suggests an even more concise method, and I love this. Rather than letting our attention just stay with a particular Vedana, vainly hoping that it will stay if it's pleasant, or to disappear if it's unpleasant, we can turn our attention to discern the empty of self-nature quality of experiences that arise and pass away. And the lack of control that we have over them, and that we can actually smilingly embrace that lack of control, because it is proof of non-self, that these are activities that arise on their own outside our control, and they're impermanent. And if we embrace them, that's dukkha. And if we don't embrace them, that is an opening to more freedom. And finally, this is the part that I really like from Analeo, that instead of focusing on these individual things, we can focus on the push, the intensity of the experience that is in each of them. Sometimes, like I had to struggle to come up with, how was I seeing that candle flame? Oh yeah, it was pleasant. But other ones come with a big push. They come with a real load of mental energy, or bodily mental energy, I think. The intensity of the feeling. And then, as they come along, you can kind of compare the intensity levels of these things. And again, this provides a kind of an opening into freedom for dealing with these Vedanas. Peg says that the Theravada literature might be seen, and this has come up several times in practice discussion, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about it later, but it might be seen as suggesting that you substitute one idea for another. That if you encounter something unpleasant, that you come up with a more pleasant idea to substitute for it, and that will help you be more equanimous about these things. She says that's a mistake. She counsels for a different path, which is adopting a sense of compassionate curiosity about how Vedanas arise, and about how they arise within you and what effect they're having on you. Are they coming out of the survival parts of our brains? Probably. Are they coming from childhood conditioning? A lot of the time, certainly so. She also suggests holding such impulses when we recognize them in a bigger container. That we remember that we have this small mind, and there's a certain sense in which the Vedanas are one of the crucial aspects of the operation of what we would call our small mind, but that we are also in the big mind that is all mind. And she says that remembering and holding the Vedanas in a bigger container is right view. That is a more accurate way of holding this constant reactivity that we bring along with us, or that was here before we arrived, in a way. We don't make our feeling tones wrong, but we hold them in the light of our Buddha nature. So that's it. I'm going to stop there, and I have an activity that I want to suggest.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
Because I don't want to confuse how we use words, so
Okay.
I want to stick with tones. We've talked, this
Thank you.
section
Feeling
is
tones.
feeling tones.
Right.
And it seems to me that when we break feeling tones into pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral, that in a way we are talking about how the brain also divides into safety and danger, constantly scanning for those.
Right.
And so danger being unpleasant and safety being either neutral or pleasant. So if that's all accurate, if we have such a strong bent on scanning for danger, because that's what the brain,
what keeps us
that's where it
alive,
keeps us. Would it, and I ask this, I'm curious about this, would it not be a good part of our practice to intentionally stay, not attached, but with the pleasant, to more fully embody a sense of pleasant, i.e. safety? Or would that be delusion? Would it then make us feel naively so safe in having practiced safety, therefore pleasant feeling or neutral feeling tone, that we would then start deluding ourselves? Did that all make sense?
Kim and I are going to talk tomorrow about seeds of wisdom and joy, and the advice that Analayo gives on just that there is a joy in being in the present moment. And there's a very powerful story from the Buddha's childhood that he, after almost killing himself with privation, he realized, or he remembered, that he had had an experience of joy. And John Tarrant uses a phrase that always sticks with me. It was joy that it was happiness that did not arise from getting what he wanted. It was just joy. And that was being under the rose apple tree while his father was out doing the harvest ceremony when he was a young child. And that was one of the things that turned him from privation to the middle way. And so we'll talk about that some tomorrow. It is a important thing to cultivate. It can be naive, it can be Pollyanna, it can be a mistake. But as you are pointing to, given the negative bias of our brains, like I said, we're just constantly scanning for something to be scared of. Think of yourself in the car. You're driving and everything is fine, but your peripheral vision and the part of your anatomy that makes your heart pump faster and puts out adrenaline and stuff is at the ready all the time, and has to be, or you would die. One time a piece of a truck fell off right in front of my wife's car, and she ran over it and it ripped the front end of her car off. But she was able to react in such a way to get off the road and not die. She didn't decide to do that. It just was an automatic reaction. And I'm sure everybody has many experiences like that. But the cultivation of a remembering of, well, in Buddha's brain, Rick Hansen says that our minds are Velcro for trouble and Teflon for pleasant experiences, for happiness. And that, it takes actual physical embodiment to hang on to a sense of happiness. And it's really good if you're remembering something to touch your lips or to put your hand over your heart when remembering a pleasant experience. So thank you for mentioning that. And I'm gonna work on my talk tomorrow and just talk about that some more, because it's very important. And it's not something that gets directly addressed, but it emerges as a theme, an underlying theme in this Satipatthana teaching.
That's
Okay,
right.
10 minutes before Kenyan starts. So let's just turn this over to question time and not do the activity, because the questions are more important.
We have 1 minute before Kenyan starts.
Yeah, 10 minutes before Zazen.
Oh, 10 minutes before Zazen. Okay. I want to hear some questions. So let's go to Ellen, and then Kim, and then Becky, and then Gabriella. Okay?
Yeah, Joel, thank you for that great talk. I really appreciated it and learned a lot. I wanted to respond to Michael's question about internal and external. I think your response was completely legitimate and tends to be how I also think of it. But I just wanted to note that Analayo, from his point of view, he thinks that the external is actually referring to others. So you have positive, you have these pleasant, unpleasant, neutral feelings. It's an understanding that and seeing it in others happening as well. So I just wanted to add that's his perception.
Okay, and I'm going to talk about that this afternoon. Oh, I'm sorry, I cut you off, Ellen. Please go ahead.
No, you didn't. You're good.
The mirror neurons in our heads that allow us to participate in others' feelings. So that's a much fuller explanation that Ellen is offering here. Okay, Kim?
Yeah, I see us more as multi-brain, or brain has many parts, and one part is this thing of what's going to go wrong, but then another part, it might be love and looking for, finding pleasant things, stuff. That it's not like one brain. And I know, Buddha's brain, mentions different parts and how they evolved.
Yeah, indeed, and I mean actual physical parts.
Yeah.
And then we use a lot of language from family systems.
And then our conditioning certainly is
Yeah.
a factor in terms of, if you grew up with people who always looked for the pleasant thing. I had my mother was Pollyanna, that kind of thing. So that helps to counter the danger brain. And we absolutely need both, right? Yeah.
So because they are both incomplete but important descriptors of the reality that's always in front of us.
I'm surprised how quickly I slam on the brakes when something goes wrong. And that suggests to me what you're saying about this danger brain.
Yeah,
It's amazing. It's not like a discursive thought. Oh boy, I better step on the brake. It happens. So I must be ready for it.
right. But what I think is important about that is, yes, if we put our hand on a hot object, our brain communicates with the hand without passing through the parts of the brain that say, oh, that's a hot thing, I really ought to not burn myself. That it doesn't go through that centers. But there's another way in which they're operating, which is, I was talking with Daniel about this yesterday, that there have been times, not all the time, but in Kinhin, when I have thought judgmental thoughts about other people who are walking the wrong way and not doing what I want them to do. And then I try and stop it, and yet it cascades through again. You know? And that there's ways in which, I guess this is about the external thing where we're projecting our perceptions onto other people. So there's an automaticity to both that again, one is a quick reaction and the other is a shaping of our thoughts. So, okay, so are you done
Yes.
with your reflection? Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Becky?
This is all wonderful stuff. It's just amazing to me, the detail and the big picture and how detailed this is and how big the picture can be. But a few thoughts that I've had across this that I would like to put out there, and as not necessarily my perception of something. One of them is that a word that he uses that is, I think, really useful for us to have is smilingly, and to respond with and hold it smilingly. And the reason it is because when we smile, the endorphins are invited. And so what it means is we aren't fabricating a change as you might if you were saying, oh, let's see, I can make this something else. But we are inviting our own chemistry to put it back into a balance. So that's my thoughts on that.
That is so important. Thank you.
And the other thing that I still struggle with, but it seems to me that we need to have the concept of necessary suffering and unnecessary suffering as part of our filter in there. For instance, even if it's just when I'm sitting, I know that I need to allow myself to respond to certain of the pain experiences I may have while sitting. Because if it only means shifting something in my back by a little bit, for instance, then I need to do that, or I'm at risk for actually having a fracture in my spine. And I know that I could move past that pain, but why the heck would I?
Yeah.
So I think that even in the midst of something where we are trying to put all of those little side things and just notice them and so on, that we need the part that says, is this necessary suffering? Or is this something that I can hold differently?
Mhm.
So that's just a thing that I struggle with that all the time in my sitting. So I think that it's a value for me, certainly.
Thank you.
Oh.
It is,
But
that's the Dharma talk I wish I'd given. Gabriella?
Hearing Nelda's question, I think that now with the new information that's coming out about trauma and how it affects the body and the system, that's something that we will need to add, like a little chapter of trauma and what happens in the body, because yeah, like would be like a natural unpleasant thing or a trauma unpleasant thing, for example, no? How restless can we be in our body, and looking for danger could be like very much high when there's trauma. Yeah.
Mhm.
So that needs to be taken care of. And it's different, like, okay, this is unpleasant, or I feel,
Mhm.
danger. So yeah, just wanted to share that.
But to quote, or not quote, but I'm reminded of something in Buddha's brain where the authors say that the fight flight response is a necessary part of human survival, and particularly if you're living in a cave and you're surrounded by saber-toothed tigers, which our ancestors did for a very long time. But if you're living a comfortable modern life and that sense of anxiety doesn't get to calm down as it does for people who have experienced, in the way that people who have experienced significant trauma never get to calm down, that is destructive. It's like physically destructive and mentally binding, mentally leading to a painful lack of freedom. And I think thank you, that's a crucial point. And I'm sorry, I think Rosemarie, you have your hand up?
Yes, I wanted to, Gabriella kind of said something that I wanted to say about trauma, because when the body and the mind, strong feelings come up from these historical conditioning, I think it's important to pay attention, like you have to pay attention. And how you do that in sitting is informed by everything you're talking about. But it's a different category. And I think I think I'm grateful to Gabriella for kind of weaving it into this conversation. It's different. And it doesn't mean indulging, it doesn't mean poor me, but it means paying attention with curiosity. And that's been a confusion for me too, when I just hear it without the traumatic, the trauma information kind of as part of it. So yeah, it's yeah, I think that's a really important factor. Thank you.
Thank you. Stephanie, is your hand up?
Yes, so I just wanted to say two quick things. One, thank you so much, Joel. This is the talk I was hoping to hear. This and the question and answers has just been everything I was looking for in this intensive. So thank you. And the second thing I want to say is mostly to the online group. I don't know if the rest of you can see the Zendo with the play of the light in the leaves. You can. So the one thing I hate about being online is when you're in the Zendo, you get to watch that over the wood floor. during the day as the day goes on. And it has been such an important part of my sitting. I had no idea I was going to get to experience that online this morning. And I just want to say what joy it has brought me to see that I get to share it with all of you online. So thank you. Thank you.
Our Earth is turning at 1,000 miles an hour, and we get to experience it by watching the window, the light from the window on the east side move across the floor. I don't see any other hands
I want
at
to
this
add
time. Okay,
one
yes.
thing, and I don't mean this in a trite way, but going back to what Gabriela said, and I know that in my practice for me with my childhood history of not just trauma, but complex PTSD from that. So lots of dragons pop up all at the same time. That my container cannot hold that moment. So what I have done for me is that is helpful. I don't know if this will be helpful to anyone else, but I learned it from Harry Potter. And I have formed another container. I have two containers. My bigger container cannot hold all of that. So much as in Harry Potter, they have a pensive bowl. And when that pops up, I physically take my imaginary wand, tap my head and put those dragons in a whole separate container because I cannot manage them at that time. The bottom falls out of my bigger container. Once my bigger container has a stronger bottom, I may not need that bowl, but for now, it's helpful. Just my little technique.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm so deeply grateful.
Mm.